cliffcentral.com. We have much to discuss, and we have our team of fantastic analysts, commentators, shit stirrers, and so on. And it's all brought to you by Nando's. Yes, Nando's still brave enough to be at the forefront of all the interesting conversations, even if those conversations are controversial. Yeah, so many corporate brands in the world that are just shying away from that stuff. They desperately want to be in the conversation, but they're terrified that it won't go exactly the way that they'd hoped. So they just avoid it altogether. Or they choose very safe, very woke topics that make them look as boring as if they'd not even jumped into the fray. So this morning, Kanthan Pillay returns, and we are pleased to welcome back to the show Unathi Kwaza, who is here just so that you know there'll be no shortage of calling it like it is. She's a Khayelitsha entrepreneur who has stood up for personal liberties, and one of the most vocal people we know of here on the show. It's good to have you back on the Burning Platform. Unathi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Very, very good. So some of your recent thoughts, gee, you have not been quiet, but then I don't expect you to be. So last Friday, let's just explain to everybody, they had ANC Friday, and it was a paid promotion where the ANC send out their 20-something foot soldiers, and there probably only are 20-somethings in the ANC who still support it without having to be paid. But these ones go out and they paid for the hashtag to trend, because that makes the ANC feel like they know what they're doing. Anyway, Unathi, is she on the phone? That's all right. You're a businesswoman. You've got shit to do. Unathi went on and joined in that conversation, but she changed the hashtag to Footsec ANC, which seems to have trended above ANC Fridays for much of the morning, because people are annoyed, right?
Okay, so people are just fed up of all the lies that are being told by the ANC, by the media, mainstream media. Mm-hmm. And so people are just showing their disgust at the ANC's failures in the last 26 years. And so they show it. Panyaza Lesufi says he's disappointed, but Panyaza Lesufi lives in luxury. He drives luxury cars. Panyaza Lesufi's children will never go to a school where there's a pit toilet. His children will never go to a school where teachers are not qualified to teach. So I don't know why he's surprised that people are pushing back against the draconian lockdown rules that the ANC has chosen. So that's why people are just hardcore, really.
Yeah. Well, Kanthan, we've discussed this ad infinitum, but the lockdown continues with no foreseeable end, even to level 3. This is starting to get on people's nerves. There is some good news. I said to Sia this morning, I see that Eskom have lodged an urgent application. In fact, it's a summons in court against all the former directors of Eskom. They're going after the board. They've actually deployed the sheriff, and the sheriff is going to attach a whole bunch of assets of people like Brian Molefe.
Look, this is a fascinating thing. I've been taking a look through this, through the summons. I don't know whether you've had a chance to have a look at it yet, Gareth.
No, I really woke up to it this morning. Someone had forwarded it.
Okay, yeah, no, well, I took a look through it yesterday, and it's fascinating because you have essentially a demand for the courts to go and confiscate money from particular individuals. Mm-hmm. But it is not against the backdrop of asset forfeiture. It is not against the backdrop of a legal process that has actually determined a quantum of money that has actually been taken by particular individuals. There isn't an investigative process, shall we say, that has highlighted particular findings and given us, let's say, a balance sheet that says, here's what's been taken by the following people. Instead, what you just have is a joint summons on behalf of the Eskom and the Special Investigations Unit, mm-hmm. which, again, now to me is completely fascinating, because you have Eskom, which is purportedly a private company, albeit a state-owned company, aligned with an organ of state, because the SIU is a constitutional body, and they are jointly issuing summons. And I really would like us to have a lawyer to explain what is the legal basis on which they are going through this process. Because, fact, if I understand what's going on here.
Well, that's also why I was confused, hoping you would sort this out. But clearly, what it does mean is that these guys have been planning this in the background for some time. And we know that we've got a new CEO at Eskom who's busy squeezing the municipalities that owe them money. So he's
Look,
going
I think that yes, you're
money.
quite right. You're quite right about the squeezing the municipalities and so forth. Except this particular thing just doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever against the legal framework that we have in the country. So, in other words, what I'm seeing right now is something that looks like a PR exercise.
Oh.
Because let's say that I happen to be Brian Molefe was one of the people who is named in the summons. And the summons pitches up, and my immediate response will say, "Well, on what basis are you actually putting in this claim?"
But Kanthan, come on. I mean, you have reports from the previous public protector. You have the state, other commissions besides the Zondo Commission that have exposed all these things. So why would you, if you were Brian Molefe, why would you not take whatever is happening now seriously? Why would you only take it as a PR exercise?
Well, you would take it seriously by actually ensuring that you have lawyers who will look at this thing and say, this makes no sense whatsoever, and we're actually going to defend it. And we then going to rip it to shreds when we get to the courts. Unati, you have to understand that this has got nothing to do with whether or not I believe that there's corruption taking place still to this day among everything that the ANC touches. But one has to take a look in terms of this particular piece of legal action. And, one then needs to ask, Gareth, here's an example. Let's say that I decided that I was the MD of, no, you call yourself president, the president of CliffCentral.com. And I decided that I was actually owed money by, well, Nando's would never owe you money because they pay on time. Let's say you were owed money by KFC, and you aligned yourself with the SIU, and you submitted a claim for them to hand over money.
Right.
And KFC's lawyers are going to say, "Hang on, what's going on here?"
I see what you mean. I got excited because I saw a legal document that looked like it was going after the money that these people owe Eskom, and maybe it's just premature. Because we do get excited. There's so little hope in South Africa at the moment for the organs of state to do the right thing and for parastatals to do the right thing.
Well, let me tell you what I need to see happening out here. I need to see people actually charged, appear in court, plead, go through a trial, and be found guilty or not guilty. If they are found guilty, at that point, the asset forfeiture unit swoops on them and confiscates their assets. And that needs to be the legal process.
Right.
Because the presumption of purported wrongdoing in the absence of a process that actually outlines very specific things that were done, I'd fail to see how it's going to stand up in court. And ultimately, everything that we're going to do to root out corruption has to be able to stand up in court. And I don't get this.
Unati?
When it comes to, I understand processes and bureaucracy, but take a few years back when banks in South Africa decided to close the Gupta's accounts. I don't remember. Well, it may have happened, but I don't remember them having to go to court and ask that they closed, because they were their clients and they had a right to, if they suspect there's something dodgy happening, then they have a right to raise that. And if their systems pick up, and frankly, their systems didn't pick up anything all along while money laundering was happening.
I dispute that. I'm quite sure that the bank systems have been picking up this stuff all the time.
Which brings me to the case: why are the banks still letting people like Machela Koko, Brian Molefe use their bank accounts? So it means that no lessons have been taken from what happened with the Gutters.
Yeah, you see the difference that we have here, Onati, and let me explain where I'm coming from on this. So, for example, when Twitter or Facebook or whoever takes a particular stand to deplatform any person, generally my view on this is that they're private companies, they're running their own ecosystems, and they can pretty much do what they want to do. Much as I think that they're doing that is actually short-sighted from a business point of view. You know, I respect the right of people to actually conduct business who they think they need to be conducting business with. Ditto in the case of the banks. So if the banks actually decide that they no longer want to be doing business with particular people, then they have the right to go ahead and do so. But the difficulty that we have in terms of the banking framework in South Africa is that the banking framework is essentially captured.
Yeah.
Because
I was about to say that the banks have hardly shown themselves to be courageous at any point since they stood up to Zuma against his appointment of Des van Rooyen. After that, I really cannot find a single time where the banks didn't just bend over and take whatever government was going to give them.
That's quite right.
And Gareth, yeah. And I remember I think it was in 2005, I was buying a house, so I was going to pay cash. And I remember standing at Standard Bank for not hours, like a long time, because they didn't even ask me like, where do you get this money and all that. But I thought later that, oh, maybe they wanted to know exactly where I got the money. They made me stand there for the longest time, and later they asked where I got the money. So if such a small amount of money can raises red flags for the banks, like how is it possible that this never happens to people who are politically exposed?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we've got countless examples of where people who are, in inverted commas, politically exposed, these are the people who seem to just be able to get endless amounts of funding, and the banks don't seem to raise too many concerns or questions about where this money comes from. Look, every tenderpreneur in this country has to be banking their money somewhere, right?
Yes.
And SARS, we already know, can look into any of our bank accounts without even having our permission, which I have a problem with, by the way.
Yeah, it just goes to show that double standards in South Africa, and banks are part of the crookery that's happening in this country.
Do you think that's fair, Canton? I mean, they haven't got a clean balance sheet themselves.
No, fairness doesn't come into it, but fundamentally what you have is the ability to actually set up a bank being constrained by a slew of regulations that ensures that only a handful of people are actually able to get through the starting gates. Now, one of the things that happens in the US, for example, is that you can pretty much set up a bank wherever you want to. So in other words, if I happen to be living in Minnesota, for example, and I want to set up something like, I don't know, the George Floyd Memorial Bank.
Yeah.
And I just invite depositors to come and put their money with me. Well, in terms of local laws, I'm actually able to do that. And I don't have to go through the process that we have in this country of setting up facilities where I forget what the security is required to be lodged now with the Reserve Bank in order to get a banking license. Perhaps I could get that info from the likes of Michael Jordan, because he's gone through that process recently in terms of setting up a bank. But to cut a long story short, the legal framework in South Africa makes it very difficult to actually set up a bank. And the degree of monitoring that actually has to take place behind the scenes is highly regulated. So at any given stage, if there is a suspicious transaction that is happening, and look at the backdrop very specifically of the corruption around the PPEs that we've been observing over the past week or so that has been coming to the fore. Every single one of those transactions should have been automatically red flagged by the banks. Yeah. Because that movement of money gets submitted to to the Reserve Bank on a daily basis. Now, why are the systems at those banks not automatically picking them up? Well, the answer is very clear, that the banks will only selectively pick up those that the ANC actually says, well, you can now go after these guys. And of course, the axe that is hanging over their head is the possibility of actually losing their banking license or having greater scrutiny in terms of everything else that they end up doing. So this is a clusterfuck of note, and it's got this entire summons that has now been issued, and really, I look at this, and I say, for example, it says 66.2. Prior to sending the letter to the DMR, Coco emailed Rapella on the morning of 7 December stating, "Boss, I really want to keep this letter factual. Please advise." This is evidence that is meant to be submitted in a trial.
Yeah.
So the other thing that you're actually doing is you're taking material that really should be part of a criminal proceeding, turning it into a civil proceedings that's actually trying to extort money. And what happens now if people actually end up paying money against the backdrop of this? Do you then turn around and say that there's no criminal proceedings because, hey, wait a second, no, actually we paid back money?
Yeah, well, it may be papering over the cracks instead of dealing with the problem. So, Unathi, I just want to know quickly from you, because I want to get into that state bank discussion as well, since we're talking about banking. But just how does electricity work in Khayelitsha, for example? We're talking about Eskom just now and the summons. So how does electricity work in the townships? Because people who don't live in the townships don't seem to understand this.
No, people who don't live in the townships, I think we all steal electricity, so we're getting it for free.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't work. We buy our electricity directly from Eskom. I think all the townships in the Western Cape buy it directly from Eskom, and then the city of Cape Town caters to, I suppose, the leafy suburbs or something. So yes, we buy electricity, but our electricity is not as expensive as what I've seen in Johannesburg. I mean, I guess every time I buy someone electricity and I send it, it's like you guys will pay 100 rand and then you get something like 25 units, and it's daylight robbery. Why aren't the rates the same for the cities or anywhere else in the country? I suppose it's because the pricing itself at Eskom is too it's fictional basically, really, because it's never been left to the market to do their thing. And so it's like someone decides, okay, you in Johannesburg are going to pay this much, and in Cape Town you're going to pay this much. So we pay electricity as much as the same as everyone else. But the other difference here is that when we have load shedding, it's only 2 hours or at the most 2.5 hours at a time. It's never been 4 hours unless there's something else wrong. Again, I don't know why there's this huge discrepancy between the provinces. And I feel sorry for people in Johannesburg. And if I move to Joburg one of these days, it means that I'll also be discriminated against by Eskom or City Power or all those entities. So we pay like everyone else, and yeah.
Now, I want to ask you about something else. We were talking about banking and,
Sure.
and how much the corporate world is involved with the politicians, and that's inevitable in any country. I mean, it happens in Western democracies. It happens in kleptocracies like Brazil. But we also have to be aware of the fact that there are some what accountants just referred to as axes that they hold, these swords of Damocles they hold over their heads. We know that the liquor industry and the tobacco industry is suddenly starting to find their spines. They're starting to fight back about this lockdown and the regulations that have basically put them out of business for 8 weeks. What do you think will be the breaking point for the rest of corporate South Africa to develop the strength to stand up to government? It seems that even journalists, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw Shahan Ramkisoon just having a go at Pule Mabe the other day on the news, which was amazing. He said to him, we're sick of hearing about your processes and your consultations and your discussions. We want to see people go to jail. And it seems more and more that South Africans are getting pissed off and that the last straw is coming to break that camel's back. We are not going to be fed lip service for very much longer. People are getting hot full, and it's because it's actually starting to hit them where it hurts. employment,
Yeah.
bills.
About, I don't know if I should speak about that interview. I thought it was disturbing for me. I saw just 1 minute
So,
and something, and I felt as a journalist he didn't behave professionally. You don't ambush your interviewee. You don't because it's not about you. Remember, it's not about you. You want answers from this person. So the least you can do is to treat them with the respect that they deserve, even if they are Pulemabe or they are any other ANC person. But
okay.
I would like to believe that viewers want answers from the ANC. So if as an interviewer you do your best to get as many answers as possible, then people must make up their minds. We don't care about your feelings. At least I don't care about Shahan's feelings. I don't care that he has issues, like as many issues that he said. He was very angry. He was highly emotional. He was irrational in how he connected himself. And I don't know why people are praising it. It's not Jerry Springer. I expect that behavior from Jerry Springer. It's not that kind of show.
Okay.
Yeah. So
All right.
it
So
was
you're not impressed.
totally not.
Okay.
I mean,
But
he's done this before.
all right. But then my question stands: what will be the straw that breaks the camel's back? We are now increasingly people's money is running out. We are not seeing much business growth or development. As you said just now, the banks don't have a whole lot of spine. We're starting to see certain industries turning around and giving government the middle finger and taking them to court and so on. How much longer do you think this will carry on?
Why are South Africans still in their homes, cozying up and watching Netflix? Why are we not on the streets marching against this tyranny that's happening? There's absolutely no reason that the lockdown went beyond the 21 days. The rules were draconian from the word go,
Yeah.
and I didn't agree with any of them, but it happened, and I suppose some people will say we had to do it. But you must know who you're dealing with. You're dealing with the ANC, you're dealing with people who are communist in nature, people who love control, people who've been dying to stop us from buying liquor and cigarettes. So these are the people that you have to deal with. So when you say yes, take my freedom for 21 days, you must know what you are saying. I was criticizing the DA yesterday for even supporting. I heard that Steenhuisen donated 1.5 million to this fund of a solidarity fund. It is ridiculous, and South Africans should be out on the streets protesting. We saw what happened in Cape Town when restaurant workers tried to do that. We saw how the ANC unleashed its force using the police to act against people who are. These are people who have a right and a constitutional right to work. These are people who have a right to trade in this country, but they're not being allowed to do so by Cyril Ramaphosa and his goons in the ANC government. So why are South Africans sitting at home? Why are parents not standing up and calling for, if a parent wants their child to get an education, why are they stopped from exercising that right? There's so many things that are wrong with this picture. It means that we don't understand what a constitutional democracy is. We were not asked anything. Cyril Ramaphosa and his people just decided for us. It's wrong. I mean, I was standing the top of the mountain and screamed that it is wrong that we experiencing such tyranny in South Africa.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
guys, you know, Gareth, let's just take a look at what's finally starting to happen. I spent most of yesterday watching the court case of the tobacco companies versus government.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of the day yesterday was spent with the tobacco companies and their related parties giving evidence as to why everything that the minister, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, has done is devoid of logic. Right. And the basic mathematics in terms of how they do calculations around the number of hospital beds that might end up being swamped by smokers was just fundamentally flawed. Because at any given stage, it translates to something like 16 additional hospital beds that might be occupied based purely on government's own figures. And they point out that the money that is being lost to the fiscus, just in terms of excise tax on cigarettes alone, is in the vicinity of 35 million rand a day. And that 35 million rand a day could actually be used to pay for those 16 beds every single day. And that 35 million rand a day being lost is on an ongoing basis. So it was 35 million rand yesterday, 35 million rand today, 35 million rand again tomorrow, and will continue until cigarettes go on sale yet again. But in the meanwhile,
and guys, why this obsession with hospital beds? I don't get it. People have been sleeping on hospital floors for years in this country. My mother in general was in hospital. She slept on the floor at Khayelitsha District Hospital. Why this sudden obsession with hospital beds? I want to understand.
That's a very good point, because it's not as if our healthcare system was suddenly fantastic a couple of years ago, and then now we've been hit by COVID, and now we're challenged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even the city of Cape Town, the Western Cape government is suddenly obsessed with beds. I asked Noma Indian Feketo, who's the MEC of Health, why are you suddenly so caring about patients? Because I sent you letters that there are no beds in Khayelitsha District Hospital. So why this sudden interest? It's just, for me, it's just politicking and just playing to the gallery, and it doesn't serve the greater good of a proper health care that we're supposed to get in this country. And I don't know, for me, everything is about government wants to spend more and more. And yet, just in February, the Minister of Finance was telling us that they want to cut the wage bill. When are they starting with that process? Because now the spending is like running away with, I mean, the way they spend, you would swear that we don't have problems in this country, economic problems, financial problems, and we've basically run out of money.
Yeah, Kanthan, to go back to your point, though, and I think Unati raises something interesting here, that like suddenly we're very concerned about our healthcare system, but up to now it's been on the back burner. There's also this question of Tito saying, and this PPE scandal may well be that straw that I'm getting at, that breaks the camel's back, because people hate theft, but they especially hate theft when it's against the poor and when it's during times of extreme duress like this is.
Oh, and Gareth, all of the theft in our country for the past 26 years has been against the poor. Let's be very clear about this.
Yes, but now we're in a pandemic where people are seeing relatives of theirs buried and you can't even go to the funeral. And it's starting to get to a point where people are now they're burnt out. They don't have anywhere else to turn. And they're not prepared to take this anymore. And South Africans are very accommodating, and we're mostly a very conciliatory nation. But I think people are starting to get seriously pissed off.
I don't think so. I think Munasi's point is actually correct. I think that there are far too many people who are still feeling relatively comfortable in terms of the fact that they've been chugging along. A lot of the intellectual economy, for example, has adapted to this process of working from home. Yeah. What they are not aware of yet is that the underpinnings of that regular income stream are being steadily whittled away by the state. And at the point at which the entire underlying economy, which actually ensures that people are able to earn money in all of those industries, once that collapses, and suddenly the job that is keeping you at home comfortably watching Netflix and still working from home, that money supply suddenly falls away and you start getting locked off one by one. That's the point at which people are suddenly going to turn around and say, hey, maybe I should have taken this seriously and done something up front. I don't think that we're going to get to that point for a while yet. Because, again, this is something we keep discussing, that the ANC has not run out of other people's money to steal yet. And, to go back to Margaret Thatcher's quote, that you eventually in a socialist setup will run out of other people's money to steal. But we haven't gotten to that point. And it's only when we get to that point that people will then turn around. And frankly, at that point, I think it might actually be too late to do anything constructive against these guys. I think that right now, a lot of us are pinning hopes on the legal processes. And if anyone's sitting to watch other stuff today, look and spending time on Twitter or on Facebook. Go and catch the live stream of the court case, which I think is starting. The case is resuming at 9:30 this morning.
Right.
And watch the government's case, which is being put out today. The government's case yesterday was, look, essentially, we need to discount the experts that British American Tobacco is putting on the payroll because they're paying them, and therefore they can't be judged to be impartial. I mean, the utter absurdity of using this as a first defense when you go before court, because, but essentially it is the old woke argument. It's got nothing to do with the substance of what is being discussed. It's got everything to do with trying to cancel whoever is actually saying it.
Yeah.
Wait, Kantat was the Limpopo their legal counsel?
Say that again?
No, I was asking if the Limpopo.
No, Dalian Poku is not their legal counsel. No, apparently our government's obsession with race does not extend to actually ensuring that they are only hiring black senior counsel.
Yeah,
fascinating.
Oh, of course. And one thing I wanted to point out, when you talk about working from home, we forget that a domestic worker doesn't have that privilege of staying behind and working from home. We forget that a poor child in Kailicha or any Ogwamashu or Soweto, they don't have access to have teachers who can teach them via the screen at home because they don't have Wi-Fi or data, uncapped data. They don't have Wi-Fi. So again, it's the poor people, the people who are struggling the most in this country, who are again being sidelined. Politicians like Malema don't even care about them. Politicians like Musa Maimane, who's been calling for kids to stay at home, they forget that in townships, libraries were closed since March. They're still not opened. Most kids in Kailisha live in homes where there's not even a single book. These children are clearly not getting any kind of education. They walk on the streets doing nothing really. And we have politicians who sit comfortably every day, who eat well, but they don't want education for these children. So domestic workers, I mean, the fact that taxis are now can be filled to 100% capacity, it means that some employers are afraid that these domestic workers will catch corona. It's ridiculous, I think, but it's a reality that they have to live with. I mean, no one must decide for an employer what they do and what they don't do to protect their health. It's their right. So we have domestic workers who can't find jobs because employers are afraid the taxis are full, so they'll bring diseases from the shore. That's what they're thinking. So that's the reality of South Africa, and we seem to forget all these points when politicians are sitting comfortably in their lounges and talking on Parliament, on Zoom, and all those things. So these are all the realities we have to face when we the lockdown, the draconian rules that we have, and the fact that we have a president who doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah. Okay.
I disagree. I think the president knows exactly what he's doing, and that everything that has taken place so far actually ties in with the entire philosophy that the ANC put forth at Nasrec. Yeah.
Which is what?
Yeah. Well, which is, expropriation without compensation. Let's, double down in terms of BEE. All of those things that he fundamentally promised to do. All of the Nasrec resolutions are being steadily implemented. It's just that we had idiots who said, no, he's just saying that to actually placate people at Nasrec. But he's a good guy. Watch him when he gets to office. He'll do things.
I want to just quickly take us in another direction, because we have talked about the lockdown and we've talked about expropriation without compensation. And by no means am I trying to just shelve those topics. They're very important. But there's stuff that happened this week at the Zondo Commission that I think also deserves our attention, as much as a tobacco case against Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma does. Because Judge Raymond Zondo has been trying his best to get all the nefarious people who've been involved in state capture over the last 10 years to come and account for themselves. And he's had a really tough time doing it. He's actually said that he's considering issuing summons to those who don't appear before the state commission, capture commission of inquiry, because he wants to charge them with a criminal offense for not arriving. Now, Judge Makubele, who has been extremely poor on the witness stand, acquitting herself really badly and showing that some judges are appointed without any diligence or due process around whether or not they actually understand the law. And this Judge Makubele said that she had a flat tire. Then when she eventually pitched up in front of the commission, her lawyer didn't want to represent her, so she had to get rid of that lawyer. She wanted to get another one. And eventually Judge Zondo said to her, no, you're actually a judge. You should be able to manage your own legal argument as well as possible. And she's been useless. Now, what's going on here is it's not farcical. This is a very bad representation of what the judiciary too looks like. I mean, he had to clear her court roll because she kept saying how busy she was and how many court cases she had to go attend. So he said, no problem. No problem. I'll phone up the judge president. I happen to know him, and I'll get your court roll cleared for you.
I have no words, Gareth.
I would love to read all the judgments she's ever made. You don't get more ridiculous than this woman, and that's why I keep saying to people, it's Women's Month and all that nonsense. And I keep telling people that it doesn't matter what the gender of the person who's appointed is. What matters is merit, as far as I'm concerned. What do you know? What have you studied? What is your experience? It doesn't matter to me whether you are a man or you are a woman. It shouldn't matter whether you're black or you're white or Indian or colored. These things should be irrelevant. And we are in trouble today because we've put gender, we've put race on top of everything else. That's why we have women like this one. There's another magistrate in KZN who refused to give good judgment when it came to the gay man who was accused of raping a woman. And she said that because this man carried a handbag, there's no way that he could rape a person. I mean, these are people that politicians put as judges, as magistrates, and they hold a lot of power in communities because I mean, think about the cases that they have judged so far and tell me where is the justice in people like this?
Yeah, I'm interested in what you've just said because it seems to me that the whole idea of affirmative action and BEE is becoming less and less popular. In fact, even on my TV show last night, Thuli Madonsela said that despite the fact that it's Women's Month and she's been an active campaigner for women, she said she thinks that the idea of promoting someone just because they are a woman or because they're black, she doesn't like that. She says it reinforces, and I'm not going to quote her directly, but I'll paraphrase roughly what she said. She said it reinforces old ideas of stereotypes of inferiority and superiority, and she's against that. When people like Thuli Madonsela,
that's interesting for me. Coming from her because
exactly
she's one of the woke people that I know. She's the queen, after all, of woke people in South Africa.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting for me that she would say something like that, which is true, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that she's come out on that side of the argument, and she also came out against lobola, which she says is an egregious and revolting policy that really doesn't fit with gender equality. So slowly, we're starting to develop some interesting points of view now that are finding acceptability in the mainstream, and maybe we're seeing the end. I mean, I spoke to somebody earlier this week about how
but about
transformation. Yeah,
but Thuli still wants reparations for Black people in this country, and she still believes that as Black people we are still victims of apartheid. We're still victims of the past, and those are things that I speak against because I'm not oppressed, number one. And I'm no one's slave, and no white person owes me anything, absolutely nothing. So Thuli Madonsela still believes in such things. So we still have a long way to go, Gareth.
Yeah, I don't doubt that we have a long way to go, but it's interesting that these opinions are starting to come to the surface now. They were unheard in the mainstream media and in intelligentsia for the last couple of years. It's starting to bubble through. Don't you think that's a good sign?
Yeah, it is, but you never know what drives people to say certain things. So yeah, it's Thuli we're talking about, and yeah, let's see what happens.
Kanthan, you wanted to add something?
No, I was just saying that we need to also take a look at what's happening against the rest in the backdrop of the rest of the world, because there's a lot of stuff that's going on right now. And a lot of it is actually happening behind the scenes. And we are so focused on the stuff that's going on in our own backyard that we're actually not watching the stuff that's happening in other parts of the world. So, for example, we've had concerted Israeli military strikes against Syria, against a backdrop of just because Israel says that it can do so. You have the Israeli government potentially in a position of being about to fall yet again, because already the unshaky coalition that Netanyahu has with his coalition partners looks like it's about to fall apart. Netanyahu himself is facing corruption charges. You have this stockpile of ammonium nitrate in Beirut, which has people, just try and put this in perspective of something like a 9/11 happening in a major city. That's exactly the scenario that has happened in Beirut. And you have to then ask yourself, what idiot is actually stockpiling thousands of tons of ammonium nitrate right next to gas facilities, which is, an explosive combination, literally, as we've actually seen happening. We have countries closing ranks now around China's activities in the South China Sea for the first time. We've got Trump pulling troops out of Germany, and the Germans saying, no, don't do that. And Trump is saying, well, we'll keep them here, but pay for them. And Germany says, no, don't do that. In the US itself, you have members of the Squad and their supporters ramping up support, and they've been winning their primary elections with better majorities than they had in the previous election. And you've got Biden still hasn't announced his veep, but increasingly evidence seems to be pointing in the direction of Susan Rice, which again is an interesting one to take a look at. The Apple's shares reached another all-time high yesterday. Now, to put this in perspective, okay, if you take the French stock exchange, the CAC 40, and you take their top 40 companies, and you combine the market capitalization of all of their top 40 companies, and it is less than the market capitalization of Apple.
It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. But this is something I'd like your comments on, both of you, because you've both been in business as well as being people who are aware of what's going on in current affairs, as most sentient beings should be. The distance between Wall Street and Main Street is growing, and this is being made a lot of in the left-wing press in the world, that this idea of the stock market as being the only barometer for the health of an economy is not necessarily correct. And that ordinary people are not shareholders in Apple. Ordinary people are not shareholders in Tesla. They have to rely on normal streams of income and expenditure in order to figure out what their financial health is. And the disconnect between those people who have Apple shares in the world and those people who don't is enormous. Do you think this is a problem going forward? Unati, you go first.
Oh, you're talking about Apple?
No, I'm talking about the
business in general.
Yeah, well, the difference between the stock market as a barometer of the health of an economy and everything else.
Gareth, let me just hop in on a very specific thing with regard to Apple, and sure. I want to use Apple as an example, because we do have a scenario now where where Congress in the US is now trying to crack down on companies like Apple and like the Google Play Store for insisting that they very closely end up curating what goes into their ecosystems.
Yes.
So, for example, Apple takes arbitrary decisions in terms of what is allowed to show up on the Apple stores and their various guises. And more to the point, Apple takes a commission on those that is, some people think is onerous. It's a commission that is as high as about 30%. But if you also consider that simultaneously, that means that for every dollar that Apple is earning on those stores, and they are taking 30 cents on the dollar, that means that there is 70 cents on the dollar that is being paid out to developers around the world, not just in the United States, around the world. And the ecosystems that have been set up by these large tech companies, which have ended up empowering developers, the payouts that Apple gives in terms of their various ecosystems. It started off with the iTunes store, which meant that instead of music being pirated, people were actually shelling out 99 cents for a song. And that, you know, at that level, people said, hey, you know, it's only going to cost me a dollar to get a song. Why would I go and steal it?
Yeah.
And 70 cents of that immediately went through to the artists, and it effectively ended up rescuing the recording industry from piracy. You've had a similar thing now happening in terms of software development, where all of these companies that are developing apps that are part of Apple's ecosystem are actually ending up becoming successful businesses in their own right. And the problem that we've got right now with this narrative that wants to go after companies like Apple, and they start talking about the disconnect, and they say that people actually can't afford these shares. Now consider this, that every time that you are making use of an app to order food, or every time that you are making use of an app to use a ride-hailing service, thanks to the fact that these Apple and Google ecosystems exist, everyone in those particular chains is able to earn a living. So it's the Uber driver, it's the gas station attendant that's actually filling up stuff. It's the restaurant that is delivering food. All of these things come into play. And the fundamental lack of understanding how these ecosystems actually work is dangerous, because it looks at companies like Apple, which are successful because of the fact that they've actually fostered success on the part of so many companies all around. Look, the fact of the matter is that the reason why we're able to have this particular conversation right now is primarily because of technology that was developed by the likes of Apple. We would not be able to be doing this right now. And so immediately at the point at which people start going down that particular path, I want to turn around and say, no, actually what we need to be doing is to be actually encouraging those businesses to be flourishing, but really look at ways in which other ordinary people can actually participate in this. And the difficulty that we've had is that workers in this country, for example, have ended up handing over responsibility for managing their money to the government, instead of actually having the ability to put their money in the hands of people whose sole mandate should be grow my money base.
Right.
In other words, if you're a worker in the public service, your first port of call should be saying, this is my pension, this is my future, and I want it actually handed over to asset managers that are able to show consistent growth. And there must be performance requirements that are built in. And that's how you actually end up building a sovereign wealth fund. Now you go to the conversations that get had in most parts of the world, and everything is about, let's go after big companies and let's tax them and let's move the money across to government, which then proceeds to spend it in a way that never filters down to the lowest possible levels. Okay, that's my economics fact.
No, that was a very good point, because we tend to see these things as either good or bad, and we look at them in binary terms, and the alternative of having government manage all this stuff is obviously worse. Unati, you wanted to jump in.
Yes. Last year I went to Seattle in the US, and before we went there, we were attending a seminar. So they sent us 5 books to read before we could go, so we could contribute more to the discussions that we're going to have. So there's one book that I love. It's titled Life After Google. It's by George Gilder. He makes arguments. I mean, we have these massive companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, who've become so big, and who I think the reason why, not that I don't think they've been helpful in developing how we communicate today. Yes, it's good, but they've become so big that they've made alliances with politicians. And so when politicians do what they do best, which is to control everyone, and put ridiculous red tape and bureaucracy in all how these companies are run and how they act in the market. You find that now free markets are not something that is well embraced, which I think is a big problem. So now we're talking about government wanting to put more rules and regulations. I've been watching a bit of Mark Zuckerberg. He has to go from time to time. He's called to answer for, I suppose, sins of Facebook. And I think if everything was left to the free markets, and if everything was left to, I mean, you can't police everyone in the world on how they
Yeah.
should conduct themselves, especially on Facebook. And to even try to think you can do that as a U.S. government or China or anyone, people will always do what they want to do.
So
As soon as they find
you're a free market purist then. You think that
absolutely,
there's no reason that government should ever have oversight over someone like Mark Zuckerberg.
absolutely, and I'm totally that. And I mean, there's nothing that ever came, nothing good that ever comes from government interference. We see it in South Africa. That's why we are where we are today. So it's not going to happen in the US. It's not going to happen in China. Government must stay in their lane and let the free markets reign.
Yeah, there are people who take a slightly different view. I'm not surprised that you take that one, Unati, because although I'm surprised, I have been surprised by a few things you've said this morning. You're not completely predictable. But in this case, there are probably a few people, even on the right in America, who say, well, the reason that we should force Facebook to account for themselves is because they are politically biased. And your point of view on that would be, so what? So start a new platform. Start a new platform that's biased in your favor, right?
And Kantan talked about the fact that these are private companies. So the way they run themselves, and I mean, these people pay taxes to the government. Government should just take the taxes and leave and do whatever they want to do, and leave them to be what they are. People, I mean, the idea of controlling people is just very absurd as far as I'm concerned. And the ANC has been trying to do that with this lockdown. And luckily, I'm in a township, so we don't even know what a lockdown is. The only time we encounter uncomfortable lockdown rules is when we go to shopping malls. But
Yeah.
if I go out of Khayelitsha and go, for instance, to Somerset East, I see 3 people who are just doing what they want to do, and you have to wear a mask even though you don't want, not to upset the security guards in that mall.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. I'm afraid we're out of time, so there's not going to be a lot more that we can squeeze into this hour. But it's as always.
Just want to squeeze in a particular. I don't know whether you spoke about this in the earlier hour, Gareth, but
I knew you'd force your way in there, Canton. Go for it.
the performance of Bitcoin over the past
Jesus.
week has been interesting.
Yeah. Do you want to comment on why you think it's been interesting? Can't just say something and leave it hanging.
Look, I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that the trust that people have in the established monetary systems has been steadily eroding over the longest period now. And I think if you look in terms of the political uncertainty, particularly that's happening across in the US, it is translating directly into a flight into safer havens. Consider the fact that gold broke through the $2,000 per ounce barrier for the first time.
Yes.
Now this is and consider that Russia, for example, has been steadily buying up gold on the basis that there is this hemorrhaging of trust in the US dollar and its ability to actually continue its hegemony. Remember that the US dollar is fundamentally backed by one thing and one thing alone, and that's petroleum. And in the absence of a global petroleum market that's able to actually sustain itself, and you consider what's happening in Saudi Arabia right now, I was looking at the deficits that the Saudis are currently running, and whoa, they are through the roof, because you've got MBS essentially needing to meet his promises in terms of what he's promised to develop in Saudi Arabia, but without the oil revenue to be able to do so.
Yeah.
And if I'm sitting on the outside and as a person who has no interest other than I want to actually protect the value of my money, right now, Bitcoin actually looks very, very attractive. And so the South African price, by the way, is hovering around 210,000 Rand for a single Bitcoin. And has been, a lot of people thought that this would be just another blip, but it's been sitting there now for more than the past week. So I find this quite fascinating.
Good points raised, and thank you both very much for your time. I'm very pleased to have had these conversations today, because I think we're about to enter a period where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer like never before. And I know that that's not something that either of you are particularly, that's not your number one political problem with the world. There are many others. I know Unati's obsessed with freedom. Yes?
and Gareth, just one last thing. The reason why the poor are getting poorer is not because of capitalism. It's because of, Professor George Aite has a book, Applied Economics for Africa. You will know why Africa is poor today. It's not because of capitalism. It's because African leaders have chosen to embrace socialism since they took over from colonialists. So if we embrace capitalism more, then the poor would be out of poverty.
Well, look, I mean, this is a discussion for another day, but I know equality is not the only barometer of how well or poorly a country's doing either, just like the stock markets aren't. All I'm saying is that after all of this conversation we've had about so many things, political and economic, it seems to me that gap is going to widen, and it might be X or Y's fault. It might be government interference. It might be the markets. It might be all kinds of things. It is a reality. And I thank you both for your expertise today. It's always good to check in with you. And thank you to Nando's for being part of this too, and to you for listening to it. If you want to find out more, go to cliffcentral.com. There are a ton of other podcasts for you to be a part of. Thanks, Unati. Thank you, Kanthan. Thanks to you. We'll see you tomorrow at 6 o'clock.
Thank you.
Great stuff.